Greetings everyone, and welcome back to the shed of endless possibilities. Another story for you today, folks, from my book Dark Thoughts, which is short horror stories, poems and other stories to make people think. And here it is, folks. This is actually a fairy story. Are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. There was an elfin princess who was born into the world, born by mistake into the world of the Earthwalkers. The elemental spirit world was shocked that such a terrible thing had occurred. How could this have happened? Who or what was to blame? A convocation was ordered. All the elders of the Fae met in the shade of the old oak tree, a tree which was revered by the forest dwellers. King Grumpfutuk, king of the gnomes, presided over the meeting. Settling himself down on his throne, he prepared himself to pass his judgment after hearing the evidence presented to him. It was not long before the gathering became agitated. Arguing broke out amongst those assembled. How would the princess ever learn just who she was, what she was destined for? King Grumpfutuk listened intently, carefully weighing up the arguments that he was hearing. The meeting went on into the darkness of the night, everyone scratching their heads, wondering just how this terrible thing could have happened. One name kept being put up forward as being the one the majority suspected. All fingers were pointing firmly at the king of the Hobgoblins, Dromar. Dromar was wicked beyond belief, and had for a long time wanted to sow seeds of discord within the elemental spirit world. Anger arose amongst those gathered, and they demanded Dromar was brought to justice. King Grumpfutuk arose and said, "So be it." Word went out into the world of the forest dwellers to capture Dromar and to bring him before the court under the shade of the old oak tree. Fauns were sent out to capture him, but Dromar was nowhere to be found. He had seemingly vanished from sight. Reports were sent back to the elders, whose anger towards the culprit was tangible. King Grumpfutuk stood and spoke again to the assembled Fae, saying, "My dear brothers and sisters, we must put our anger to one side, and instead turn our thoughts and attention to finding the princess, so we can tell her exactly who she is. Time is running out, and the magical power she possesses is waning. And as long as she has that magic within her, she can be brought back to her own people." The gathering asked, how could this be? How would it happen? Who could search her out and return her safely home again? King Grumpfutuk spoke, saying, "We must find a champion and send him out into the world of the Earthwalkers, a place normally taboo and not to be entered. But," continued King Grumpfutuk, "we must find this champion quickly, because if the magic within the princess dies, then she will become an Earthwalker." There was only one of the elemental spirits who had the wisdom to undergo such a task, and this was a Dryad known as Changarath. He was very wise and as old as the forest itself. Changarath stared into the big brown eyes of King Grumpfutuk. He bowed and said, "I will do it." A cheer rang out from the assembled Fae. King Grumpfutuk gave him his blessing and sent him on his way, wishing him a safe journey and speedy return, and a hope that the princess would be with him. Changarath was told about the princess and the possibility of what she might look like, but most of all he should be able to recognise the magic within her body. Changarath was told he must try by whatever method to convince her to return to the forest with him. Changarath set out on the quest to find the princess, a quest which would take quite some time, covering many miles of dangerous Earthwalker territory. The quest went on, and several years had passed by without a trace of the princess, or that familiar sense of magic being present. Changarath knew that the longer the quest went on, the weaker her magic would become. The princess had reached her 17th birthday, and her Earthwalker parents were holding a celebration party for her. The garden of her home had been decorated. There was a marquee. Lights had been placed along the pathway which led to an old ornate gate. Beyond the gate was a pathway leading to a beach. It was an idyllic setting. Everything looked so beautiful, and the sound of the waves breaking on the beach added to the ambience. This was the night that Changarath would find the princess. He was resting in the branches of an old oak tree at the bottom of the garden. He recognised the princess straight away, as he could feel the magic within her. Watching on from the branches, he planned his move. A satisfied smile filled his face, but he knew he would need some help. Changarath went down onto the beach and stared into the ocean. He called out into the waters and summoned the Undines, the water spirits. He explained to them what he needed them to do. Coming forth from the water, they spoke with Changarath, telling him of a secret cave along the shore. A plan was hatched to lure the princess to the cave, where Changarath would be waiting. Everything was ready. All they needed to do was to wait for the party to begin, and then make their move. The Undines came up from the waters and entered the garden, appearing as balls of light, which danced before the eyes of the princess. She became hypnotised by them and the aerial ballet they were performing for her. She became overwhelmed by them, and she had no option other than to follow them along the lighted path. Carefully opening the old iron gate, which creaked as it opened, onto the pathway leading to the beach, where Changarath waited in anticipation. The princess followed on blindly, all thoughts of her party now far away, gone from her mind. She was mesmerised by the glowing orbs of light. She walked on as the waves crashed upon the shore. She didn't have a care in the world as she carried on following the glowing balls of light. And there in the distance was the cave, its mouth yawning, and a strange glow emitted from the entrance, a strange yet warming glow. The closer she got, the quicker the orbs of light moved. The glow coming from the cave heightened her interest, and she wanted to explore what may lay within its depth. Following the Undines, she entered the cave mouth, and she could smell a dankness which for some reason she could recognise. Something caused her to fall into a daydream state, invoking images of past lives and times. There was something so familiar about that smell. She heard a noise from deep in the cave which brought her back to her senses. A little nervously she moved slowly forward towards the source of the glow, her mind conjuring up pictures of what might be emitting that light. The princess rounded the corner, and there stood Changarath. Her heart skipped a beat as she saw this figure from the elemental spirit world stood there. Changarath spoke. "Fear me not, my princess." He bowed before her and said, "I have not guided you here to harm you. I have guided you here to tell you who you really are, and so I can help you fulfill your destiny. Destiny, she thought. Who is this creature? How does he know me, and what does he want from me? Changarath asked her to sit down on the rocks and listen to what he had to say. She agreed and settled herself down on the rocks beside him. Her heart was still beating fast, but for some reason all trace of fear had passed. He began by introducing himself as Changarath the Dryad, a dweller of the forest. He explained that he had been sent out by the Fae Council to find her and return her to her own people, who were the forest dwellers of the earth. And you are the rightful princess of those people. The princess was clearly shocked by this. She waited for him to finish what he was saying. Do you have any questions before I go on? Changarath asked. She sat there for a few minutes, thinking and trying to take in what had been said. Her first response was, "Why me?" Followed by, "I really do not understand what you are telling me. I am just a child born into the earth, and today is my birthday." Changarath nodded and spoke, saying, "Yes, princess, that is true. But at your birth there was a mistake. A darker force was there which robbed you of your birthright. The king Hobgoblin Dromar was there, and he gave you to the Earthwalkers in an attempt to cause discord within the elemental spirit kingdom." "But how?" she replied. Changarath raised a finger to her mouth, saying, "Be quiet for a moment." He carried on talking to her, explaining that she had magical powers which were fading away, and the longer she was away from the forest, the less her power would become. So she must return while she still had enough magic within her. Taking a pebble from the cave floor, he placed it in her hand and asked her to imagine that it would be something else. She closed her fingers over the pebble and thought, and on opening her palm there was a beautiful scarlet rosebud. "Try again," Changarath said. So closing her hand around the rosebud and thinking again, she opened her palm, and there was a beautiful red ruby. Changarath asked her if she had ever felt different from the other Earthwalkers. Had she ever felt that she did not belong there? The princess had to admit that there had been times why she wondered why she was different, why children had mocked her at school because of her name, Akasha, because her ears were slightly pointed. They called her Pixie, Elf and other names, which upset her, only for some accident to happen to them later. Changarath asked her to take his hand and follow him to her rightful home. "But what about my parents?" the princess asked. "They will miss me so much." Changarath said, "Will they really? How many times have you been shouted at by your parents? How many nights have you been sent to bed without supper? How many times have you felt their punishment?" Swallowing, the princess had to agree. There had been many times that her parents had been nasty to her. But while talking with Changarath and smelling the familiar smells, not once had her parents come to mind. There were sounds coming from the beach. In the distance she could hear people calling her name. "Akasha, where are you?" She looked at Changarath, staring into his eyes, and said, "I really must go now. They are looking for me, and I will be in trouble again." But deep inside she wanted to stay there in the cave. Dreams that she had dreamed since being born were replayed before her eyes, memories of her childhood and even deeper memories which were now so alive in her mind. Torn between the earthwalkers and the forest dwellers, what should she do? Her head was spinning while the shouts outside grew louder and angrier. Changarath smiled at her and said, "Come, Princess, it is time for you to take your rightful place." Torchlight entered the cave. Angry shouts were heard. Changarath reached out his hand, beckoning her to take hold of it. The princess could see the love and respect that he had for her, which was such a contrast to the angry shouting. Reaching out, she took his hand, gripping it tightly. Changarath jumped into a clear pool of seawater, held the princess tightly. The Undines followed, giving them safe passage back to where they were meant to be. Several days later the princess awoke, not in her normal surroundings, but instead on a bed of bracken and moss. Surrounding her were large brown elfin eyes, all looking up at her in adoration. At the foot of the bed stood King Grumpfuttock, his furrowed brow wrinkled, his lined face smiling as he looked upon her. "Welcome home, Princess Akasha. It is so wonderful to have you back among your people." The princess smiled and knew that at last she was home among her people. The reign of Princess Akasha had begun. The Earthwalkers mourned her for a short while, but she was soon forgotten and replaced by another Earthwalker. The Hobgoblin King Drommar was finally caught by the Fauns and sentenced by the council to be cast out into the outer darkness between life and death, and he remains there to this day. Harmony has been restored to the elemental spirit world, where only a very special Earthwalkers are allowed to see. I am lucky enough to be one of those special people. How about you? Right folks, I hope you've enjoyed what you've heard there. If you have, please hit the like button, leave a comment in the box below, hit the bell icon for any future uploads, and above all, please subscribe. Helps the channel grow and we become part of that bigger community. As always, I will say to you all, Namaste. Enjoy the rest of Friday, everyone. Bye for now.